She signed the papers without looking up. That was the thing no one tells you about the end of a marriage. It doesn't always arrive with screaming or broken dishes or dramatic declarations in the rain. Sometimes it comes on a Tuesday afternoon, in a beige office that smells faintly of printer ink and someone else's coffee, and the only sound in the room is the scratch of a pen moving across paper, and then silence. Valentina Conti, 47 years old, set the pen down on the desk with the careful precision of someone who had learned long ago that composure is not the absence of feeling. It is the decision to feel it later, in private, where no one can use your tears against you. Bryn didn't look at her. She was already reaching for her phone. The attorney, a young man named Davis who clearly wished he were anywhere else, gathered the papers and said something about processing times and final notices. Valentina nodded once. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door, and she paused. Just for a second, one single second, with her hand on the frame. She thought Bryn might say something, anything. Even something cruel would have been better than nothing. Even the words she had said a week ago, laughing at the silver in Valentina's hair, mocking the age lines around her eyes, telling her she was the kind of woman who tired people out. Even that would have been proof that Bryn felt something, that Valentina had mattered enough to wound. But Bryn said nothing, and Valentina walked out into the Georgia afternoon, into light that was too bright and too warm for what she was carrying inside her chest. And she sat in her car for a long time without starting the engine. If you are listening to this right now, I want you to stay with me. Because what comes next is not a story about heartbreak, even though heartbreak is where it starts. It's a story about what happens when a woman who has spent years making herself smaller, quieter, easier to love, finally decides to take up space again. And maybe you know something about that. Maybe you've sat in a car, like Valentina sat, engine off, hands in your lap, trying to figure out which version of yourself you're supposed to be now. If you have, leave a comment. Just say, I know that car, because I think more of us have sat in that car than any of us admit. Valentina drove back to the farm. It had been her sanctuary for 17 years. 12 acres in the Georgia hill country, rows of lavender that she had planted herself, a small vineyard she tended with obsessive care, a farmhouse that she had slowly, room by room, made into something that felt like her, a wooden table big enough to seat 10, because she had always imagined filling it with people she loved, a kitchen with copper pots she actually used, a porch swing that faced west, so she could watch the sun set over the hills while drinking whatever she was testing that season. She had built this life with her hands and her silence. She had fled Italy at 30, fleeing the Conti name and the weight that came with it. The expectations, the tabloids, the marriage proposals from men she'd never wanted. The constant, relentless surveillance of being a woman in a powerful family. She'd wanted something real, something that was just hers. She had found the lavender farm, and she had found, eventually, Bryn. She should have known, maybe. Bryn was everything Valentina had left Italy to escape, bright and sharp and very, very interested in being seen. She had loved that in the beginning. She had loved the way Bryn lit up rooms, loved the way she laughed without covering her mouth, loved the unapologetic volume of her. She had thought, this is what life is supposed to feel like. This is what I came here for. It took a year of marriage to understand that Bryn wasn't just interested in being seen. She was interested in being seen by everyone. By anyone. By anyone who looked long enough. Valentina had forgiven the first infidelity with the quiet devastation of a woman who loves too much and believes she can love enough for two. She had forgiven the second with the desperate logic of someone who has confused forgiveness with strength. By the time she found evidence of the third, she didn't feel devastated anymore. She felt something worse. Tired. Deeply. Permanently tired. And then came the lawyer's office. And Bryn's laughter. And the words about age and irrelevance that Valentina would carry in her chest for months, like a stone she couldn't put down. She walked through the lavender that evening as the sun went low and pink over the hills. The plants were at their best, fat and fragrant, the kind of purple that photographers drove hours to capture. She ran her hands through the tops of the flowers and she thought, I built this. I built all of this, and I was going to give it to someone who thought I was nothing. She went inside. She opened her laptop, and she booked a flight to Milan, not because she was running, because she was finally, after 17 years, ready to go home. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with leaving a place you built with love. It is not like other griefs. It's slower, and it catches you at strange moments, in the middle of packing a box, or wrapping the copper pot in newspaper, or standing in the doorway of the room you painted by hand 3 summers ago, while the person you loved watched from the hallway and said, "You're going to get paint on your face." And you did, and they laughed, and you thought, "I will remember this forever." You remember it. But it doesn't feel the way it used to. Valentina sold the farm to a young couple from Atlanta who had been looking for exactly this. She gave them the lavender plants and the vineyard, and the handwritten notes she'd kept in a binder for 15 years. What to watch for in each season, which plants struggled in drought, how to read the soil after rain. She gave them the table big enough for 10. She kept the copper pots. She flew out of Hartsfield-Jackson on a Wednesday morning in October, in a window seat, with a single checked bag and a carry-on, and as the plane banked left over Georgia, she pressed her hand to the glass and looked down at the patchwork of farms and hills and roads that had held her life, and she did not cry. She had already done that, in the car, in the farmhouse, in the lavender alone, on the last evening before she handed over the keys. She had already spent her tears on the things she was leaving. Now she was going toward something. She just didn't know what yet. Milan in October is a different city than the one she remembered. Or maybe she was a different woman, and cities only change when we do. She stayed the first 2 weeks in a hotel in Brera, in a room with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where pigeons gathered each morning, and an old man came out in his robe to feed them. She ate alone at small restaurants she chose by walking until something looked right. She drank wine she hadn't ordered to impress anyone. She let herself sleep 9 hours and woke up slowly, with coffee and no schedule, and the strange luxury of having nowhere to be. Her family knew she was back. Her sister Camilla had called 3 times before Valentina answered, and when she finally did, she said simply, "I'm fine. I'm here. I'll call when I'm ready." Camilla, who knew better than to push, said, "Okay, I love you." And that was that. The Conti name was everywhere, of course. It always had been. The family business was impossible to avoid. Its buildings, its vineyards, its foundation. After her grandmother Eleonora died, Valentina had been in contact with the family lawyers, knowing she'd inherited the controlling stake, knowing she'd have to deal with it eventually. She had delayed it for Bryn. She had delayed it because she'd wanted to hold on to the simplicity of the Georgia farm for as long as she could. Now she had no reason to delay. She called the lawyers on a Thursday. She met with them on Friday. By Monday of the following week, the announcement was in the financial press. Valentina Conti, who had not been publicly associated with the family empire in 17 years, had assumed control of the Gruppo Conti. Her phone rang for 48 hours without stopping. She didn't answer most of it, but there was one call she didn't expect. Her name was Juliana, or rather, the call wasn't from Juliana directly, but from a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Petra, who ran a contemporary art foundation in the Navigli district, who said in her characteristically direct way, "I'm calling because I have a friend who I think you should meet, and I'm not going to explain why. I'm just going to give you both each other's numbers, and whatever happens from there is between you and God." Valentina had laughed, an actual laugh, the kind that surprised her when it came out. "Petra, you haven't changed at all. Why would I change? I was right about everything the first time." She texted Juliana 3 days later, mostly because she was curious. The message she sent was simple. "Petra gave me your number. She didn't explain why. I'm beginning to think she never explains anything." The reply came back in 20 minutes. "She gave me your number too, also no explanation. She did say you make wine and I should be nice to you because of that. I own a bookshop." I'm assuming she thought we'd bore each other into friendship. Valentina smiled at her phone for longer than she wanted to admit. "How's the bookshop?" she wrote. "Old. Slightly chaotic. I love it desperately," came the reply. "Can I come see it?" There was a pause. Then, "Saturday morning. I'll make coffee that's better than anything you'll get anywhere else in this neighborhood. Fair warning. I have opinions about how people should behave in bookshops. I'll behave. We'll see." If you're still with me right now, and I hope you are, I want to take a second and just say, I know that some of you might be listening to this and wondering when the hope part comes. When does it stop hurting and start feeling like something worth living for? It comes, I promise you. But it doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Sometimes it arrives on a Saturday morning, with coffee, in a bookshop you almost talked yourself out of visiting. And if this story is touching something in you right now, it would mean the world to me if you hit that like button. It tells me that this kind of story matters to you, and it helps more people find their way here. Thank you for being with me. Giuliana Ferraro's bookshop was called Meridione, which means midday in Italian, or the South, depending on how you read it. It sat on a narrow street in the Tuscany neighborhood, between a florist and a tailor, with a wooden sign that had clearly been repainted more than once. The window display was impractical and beautiful. Stacks of books arranged around a small fig tree in a clay pot. A hand-lettered quote in chalk on a dark board that read, I took a deep breath and listened to the old brag of my heart. I am. Sylvia Plath. Valentina recognized it immediately and felt, inexplicably, a tightening in her chest. She pushed open the door. The shop smelled like old paper and good coffee and something faintly floral, dried roses maybe, or lavender, which made Valentina stop for just a second in the doorway, with the ghost of her farm in her lungs. You must be the winemaker, the voice came from behind a stack of books on the front counter. And then the woman stepped around it, and Valentina saw Giuliana Ferraro for the first time. She was... Valentina would struggle later to explain this. The kind of person who occupies a room differently than other people, not because of any particular feature, but because of how still she was inside a body that was clearly capable of great animation. She was perhaps 42 or 43, with dark hair cut short on the sides and longer on top, and eyes the particular warm brown of strong tea, and the kind of face that doesn't try very hard, and doesn't have to. She wore a cream linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up and ink on 2 of her fingers, and she held a coffee mug in both hands the way you hold something you're genuinely grateful for. And, you must be the bookseller, Valentina said. Every single day. Giuliana tilted her head slightly. Come in. The coffee is on the counter. Valentina came in. She accepted a ceramic mug of coffee that was, as promised, better than anything she'd had in the neighborhood. She stood in the middle of the shop and turned slowly, taking in the shelves that went floor to ceiling, the wooden ladder on a rail, the mismatched chairs in the back corner where someone had clearly been reading recently. There was an open book face down on the arm, which made Valentina wince slightly. Please don't, Giuliana said, without looking up from whatever she was writing. Don't what? Rescue that book. I know it's face down. I know what that does to the spine. It's mine, and I have a complicated relationship with doing things correctly. She looked up then, and there was a very slight smile at the corner of her mouth. I'm a bookseller. I'm allowed to be hypocritical about books. I wasn't going to say anything. Your face said it. Valentina laughed. It was, she would think later, the second real laugh she'd produced in months, and it felt like something small and important shifting in her chest. A drawer that had been stuck finally sliding open. They talked for 2 hours that first morning, moving through subjects the way 2 people sometimes do when the conversation has its own momentum. Wine, obviously, and books, and Milan, and the particular exhaustion of being known for your family rather than yourself. Giuliana had grown up in Palermo, the youngest of 4 daughters, the only one who had stayed unmarried. She had lived in Milan for 12 years. She had owned the bookshop for 7. She had, she said with perfect neutrality, been in love twice, badly, and decided that 3 was unlikely but not impossible. Valentina found herself watching Giuliana's hands when she spoke. The ink on her fingers, the way she gestured toward the shelves when making a point, as if the books could corroborate her. The way she held stillness and motion together in the same body, like a person who had made peace with being exactly who she was. It was disarming. Valentina wasn't sure what to do with it. She left the bookshop at noon with a book Giuliana had pressed into her hands, The Hours by Michael Cunningham, and the half-formed thought that she might come back. She came back on Tuesday, and Thursday, and the following Saturday. and the one after that. October turned to November, and Valentina found a rhythm she hadn't expected to find. Mornings, she worked from a temporary office the family lawyers had set up. Meetings, decisions, the slow and complicated business of learning to lead a company she'd been deliberately ignorant of for 17 years. Afternoons, she walked. The city had changed, but it was still hers in some fundamental way. Still lodged in her bones, she found streets she'd forgotten, courtyards hidden behind heavy doors. A canal that looked the same as it had when she was 22, and convinced she was escaping something. She was not escaping. She understood that now. She had simply taken a very long detour. And the bookshop. She returned to the bookshop with increasing regularity, and each time she came, Juliana pressed another book into her hands, and they talked until the afternoon light changed, and one of them noticed they were hungry. Twice they walked to a nearby restaurant together and ate and talked more. And Valentina noticed that she stopped thinking about Bryn during those hours. Not because she was distracted or suppressing, but because the present was simply more interesting than the past. "You look different than you did when you first came in," Juliana said one evening, over pasta and a carafe of something local and decent. She said it without preamble, the way she said most things. Different how? Juliana considered, like someone who has stopped apologizing in advance. Valentina put her fork down. "I didn't realize I was doing that. Most people don't." "Is that—" She paused. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The change?" Juliana looked at her across the table with those warm, direct eyes. "It's a good thing, Valentina. It's a very good thing." The way she said her name, with the full Italian weight of it, unhurried, all 4 syllables given their due, made something happen in Valentina's chest that she had been carefully not examining. She examined it that night, lying in the dark in her rented apartment, and she was not surprised by what she found there. She was something else, something more complicated than surprised. She was frightened, not of Juliana, and not of what she felt. She was frightened of the specific calculus of wanting something new after the particular devastation of losing something you'd believed was real. She was frightened of hoping. I want to stop here for just a moment, because I think this is important. Valentina is not a woman who makes herself small, but she had spent 3 years making herself acceptable to someone who never deserved the effort. And when that ended, when she sat in that lawyer's office and heard Bryn laugh at who she was, part of her had quietly begun to believe that maybe the problem was her. Maybe she was too old for this. Maybe love was something that had simply passed her by, and the thing to do was be graceful about it. Do you know that feeling? That specific, quiet surrender? I think a lot of women know it, and I think a lot of women in their 40s and 50s are told, directly or indirectly, that they are past the age of romance and desire and beginning again. As if the heart has an expiration date, as if wanting something beautiful for yourself becomes, at some point, embarrassing. I'm here to tell you it doesn't. If you're listening and you're in that place, the place where you've started to believe the story someone else told about you, stay with me. Because Valentina's story is not over. Not even close. And if this is resonating with you, please subscribe to this channel. Because this is exactly the kind of story I want to keep telling. Stories about women who choose themselves, in all their fullness, at every age. I'd love for you to be here for all of them. The first time something shifted between them, truly shifted unmistakably, was a Saturday in December. It was cold by Milan standards, the kind of damp chill that got into old buildings and settled there. And Meridione was particularly cozy for it. Juliana had lit a small space heater near the reading chairs, and there was the smell of coffee and something baked that a neighbor had brought over, and only 2 customers had come in all morning. The city had the drowsy, inward feeling of a place preparing for Christmas. Valentina had been sitting in the back corner for 2 hours, ostensibly reading, actually watching Juliana arrange a new display near the window, and having an internal argument with herself about whether what she was feeling was real, or simply the result of 6 weeks of being alone in a new city and finding someone who was kind and interesting. It was both of those things, she concluded. But it was also something else. Juliana climbed down from the small step stool she'd been using and turned and caught Valentina watching and said nothing at all. She just looked back. For a moment that lasted 3 seconds, or 3 years, Valentina couldn't tell. and then she said, "Are you going to tell me, or do I have to guess?" Valentina's heart lurched. "Tell you what. Whatever it is you've been thinking about all morning." Valentina set down her book. "I've been thinking," she said very carefully, "about whether I am a woman who is capable of starting something new. Whether I still trust my own judgment. Whether—" She stopped. Juliana walked to the chair across from her and sat down. She didn't fill the silence. She just waited. And Valentina understood that this was a person who knew how to hold space for someone else's unfinished sentence. "I was married for 3 years," Valentina said. "And before that I was alone for 14 years by choice, because I didn't trust the world enough to let someone in. And then I let someone in, and it was the wrong person. And she told me, at the end, that I was—" She paused again. "And this time it was harder. She implied I was past it, that wanting to be loved at my age was somehow—" "Stop," Juliana said, quietly, but with complete authority. Valentina stopped. "I need you to listen to me," Juliana said, "because I'm going to say this once, and I mean it, and I want you to actually hear it." She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, and held Valentina's gaze with a directness that made it impossible to look away. "Whoever told you that was wrong, completely, catastrophically wrong. And the fact that you believed it even for a second, even in the back of your mind, is the saddest thing I've heard in a very long time." Valentina felt something crack open in her chest, not painfully, like a window being opened in a room that had been shut all winter. "I'm 43 years old," Juliana continued. "I've been in love twice, badly, and I told you 3 was unlikely but not impossible. And I said that because I was being cautious. Because I'm also someone who has learned not to trust her own wanting." She sat back slightly. "I think you understand that." "I do," Valentina said. Her voice was very steady. She was proud of that. "Good." Juliana looked at the window, where the December light was falling pale and diffuse on the books in the display. Then she looked back. "So, what would you like to do about it?" The question was so plainly spoken, so devoid of performance, that Valentina laughed, the 3rd real laugh she counted, and then she said, "I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea." "That's fine," said Juliana. "We can figure it out." And they did, slowly. With the careful deliberateness of 2 women who had both been hurt before and had decided that hurt was not a reason to stop, but it was a very good reason to be honest. Valentina had dinner at Juliana's apartment for the first time in the 2nd week of December. A small, perfect apartment in the Porta Romana neighborhood, crammed with books and plants and things Juliana had clearly kept because they mattered to her and for no other reason. There were photographs on the wall in no particular order, prints she'd loved, a child's drawing pinned to a corkboard that turned out to be from her niece in Palermo. They cooked together. This was Juliana's idea, not a restaurant, not the careful performance of a first date, but the real thing. Chopping and stirring and arguing mildly about whether the pasta needed more salt. It did. And finding a rhythm together in a small kitchen that felt, to Valentina, like something she recognized from a very long time ago, from a self she'd almost forgotten she used to be. After dinner, they sat on Juliana's small balcony with the last of a good Barolo, and the cold city spread out below them. And Valentina told her, properly, about the Conti family, the wealth, the escape, the reason she'd left, and the reason she'd come back. She told her about the farm and the lavender, and the table big enough for 10. She told her about Bryn. Not everything, but enough. Enough that Juliana understood without needing the details. Juliana listened. She didn't offer solutions or comfort or well-meaning deflections. She listened the way very good readers listen to books, actively, fully present, letting the story be what it was. When Valentina finished, Juliana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What did you name the farm?" Valentina blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The lavender farm. Did it have a name?" She had expected almost any other response. She smiled, despite herself. "I never named it. I always meant to." Juliana nodded, as if this explained something. "That's the thing about places you're not sure you mean to stay. You don't name them. You leave that door open." Valentina looked at her. "You think I always knew I was going to leave?" "I think," Juliana said carefully. That part of you always knew you hadn't found your real place yet, and I think 17 years of building something beautiful from scratch proves that you are someone who commits fully to whatever you decide to commit to. She turned to look at her directly. Which means that when you're actually in the right place, it's going to be extraordinary. Valentina felt the stone in her chest, the one she'd been carrying since the lawyer's office, since Bryn's laughter, since the scratch of the pen on the divorce papers, shift. Not dissolve. Shift. Like something becoming lighter. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Someone nicer, honestly, more careful. Juliana raised an eyebrow. I am nice. You're kind, Valentina said. There's a difference. Nice people tell you what you want to hear. You tell me what's true. She looked out at the city. I didn't realize how much I needed that until right now. Juliana said nothing, but she reached out and put her hand, warm and certain, over Valentina's where it rested on the balcony railing. They stayed like that for a long time. Not speaking, the city doing what cities do at night. Alive and indifferent and beautiful, and Valentina thought, I am here. I am exactly here, not somewhere I'm passing through and not somewhere I'm hiding. Here. Maybe you know what I'm describing. That specific moment when a place, or a person, stops being temporary in your mind. When you stop making plans to leave and start noticing the things you would miss. If you felt that, please tell me in the comments. Tell me where you found your here. I mean it. I read everything. And if this is your first time on this channel, I'm so glad you stayed. If stories like this are the kind that feed something in you, subscribe. Because this is what we do here. We tell the truth about women's lives, about love at every age, about starting over and what it takes and what it gives back. Christmas came, and Valentina spent it with her sister Camilla's family in the hills outside Bergamo. Camilla's wife, Elena, their 2 teenagers. A table absolutely buried under food. It was chaotic and warm and overwhelming. And at some point in the afternoon, Camilla found her on the terrace and put a glass of wine in her hand, and said nothing for a while, just stood there with her, and then said, You look like yourself again. Valentina considered that. I'm not sure I was ever fully myself. No, Camilla agreed, but you're closer than you've been in years. She glanced at her sideways. Is there someone? Valentina started to say no, then stopped. Maybe. Possibly. I'm being cautious. Good, said Camilla. Cautious is good. You were never cautious before, and look what happened. She said it with complete sisterly practicality, and absolutely no malice. What's she like? She owns a bookshop, Valentina said, and something about saying it out loud, casually, like it was a normal thing, made it feel real in a new way. She searched for the word. She's a straight line. You know what I mean? She doesn't waver. She means what she says. She doesn't perform for you. She looked out at the winter hills. She makes me feel like I'm allowed to be exactly as complicated as I am. Camilla was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Valentina, that's everything. I know, Valentina said. I know. The new year arrived, and with it a question Valentina hadn't anticipated. What to do about the farm, not the Georgia farm. That was gone, gently and finally, in the hands of people who would love it. She meant the Conti family property in Tuscany, 50 acres of vineyard and olive groves, and a farmhouse that had been maintained but unloved for years, sitting in the hills between Montalcino and Pienza, waiting. Her cousin Alessandro had suggested selling it. Too remote, he said, not practical from a business perspective. We're not in the agricultural tourism business, Valentina. We could be, she'd said. She drove out to see it on a gray January afternoon, alone, on roads that wound through the Tuscan hills in the way that Tuscan roads do, as if they've been designed not to get you anywhere quickly, but to show you everything along the way. The farmhouse sat at the top of a gentle hill, with a view that in any other season would have been magnificent, and even in January, bare and cold, was worth the drive. She stood in the vineyard for a long time. She thought about the lavender. She thought about the copper pots wrapped in newspaper. She thought about a table big enough for 10 that she had given away and might, possibly, one day want again. She called Juliana. I'm standing in a vineyard, she said, when Juliana answered. Are you asking for my opinion, or is this a life update? Both. A brief pause. What does it feel like, standing there? Valentina looked at the rows of dormant vines, the old stone walls, the hills rolling away in every direction. She thought about what it felt like to build something with her hands and watch it become real. She thought about the name she'd never given the Georgia farm, the open door she'd left unconsciously, because she'd always known. It feels, she said slowly, like the place I was actually going. She heard Juliana exhale, not dramatically, just the small breath of someone whose suspicion has been confirmed. Then you know what to do. Come see it with me, Valentina said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. But she didn't take it back. Another pause. Longer this time. When? Juliana said. This weekend. I'll have to find someone to cover the shop. Can you? Yes, said Juliana. I can. And they drove out on Saturday morning, Juliana with a thermos of coffee and a book she didn't open and a comfort with silence that Valentina had come to love. The drive took 2 hours, and they talked in the way people talk when they're comfortable. In fragments, easily, without the pressure of performance. Juliana walked through the farmhouse and the vineyard the way she walked through her bookshop, with attention, not aesthetics. Looking at what things actually were, rather than what they might be made to appear. She touched the old stone walls. She stood in what had been the kitchen and looked at the ceiling where someone had painted, years ago, and clumsily, a border of olive branches. She crouched to look at the base of the oldest vine, thick as a wrist, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she stood up and said, "This is the one." Valentina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, certainty. Clean and uncomplicated. Yes. They walked to the edge of the property, where the hill fell away to reveal the valley below, and they stood together looking at it, shoulder to shoulder, and Valentina said, "I want to name it this time." Juliana turned to look at her. "What will you call it?" Valentina thought about lavender, about Georgia, about the table for 10, about a pen scratching paper in a beige office, and a woman who thought she was nothing, and a bookshop with a Sylvia Plath quote in the window, and hands with ink on the fingers, and the long, slow journey back to something that felt like herself. "Meridian," she said. Juliana stared at her. "That's my bookshop." "I know. I'm stealing it. It means midday, and the South, and also the place you finally arrive when you've been traveling for a very long time." She looked at Juliana directly. "I think it's the right word for this." Juliana held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but the particular softness of someone receiving something they hadn't dared ask for. "You know," she said quietly, "I named the shop when I was 31 and just arrived in Milan and needed to believe I was going somewhere." She looked out at the valley. "I didn't think anyone would ever understand why I chose that word." "I understand it," Valentina said. "I know you do." They stood in the January cold, above the Tuscan valley, and the air between them held the specific quality of a threshold, not crossed yet, but there, visible, present. Valentina turned toward her. "Juliana." "Yes. I know we're being cautious. I know what we said, Juliana said. And she stepped closer, not urgently, not dramatically, just the small, deliberate movement of a person who has made up their mind. "And I think we've been cautious long enough." When Juliana kissed her, it was not the kind of kiss that asks permission. It was the kind that offers it, that says, "Here I am, entirely, and this is what I mean, and I will not take it back." Valentina kissed her back with the accumulated weight of 17 years of self-exile, and 3 years of a wrong marriage and 6 weeks of cautious becoming, and the whole long, complicated journey back to something true. It tasted like winter, and coffee, and arrival. Spring came to the Tuscan hills with the particular extravagance of a season that has been waited for. By March, the Meridian vineyard, officially renamed and registered to Alessandro's mild bewilderment, was alive. The old vines had survived the winter and were budding. Valentina had hired a team and was working alongside them, hands in the soil, learning the particular personality of each row. She was building something again, and it felt different from the Georgia farm. Not better or worse, but different in the way that things feel when you build them in the right place. With the right understanding of why you're doing it, the farmhouse had a new kitchen. The copper pots had found their place. The table she had ordered was big enough for 12. Juliana came on weekends. She was still in Milan. The bookshop was her life's work, and she was not leaving it. But the drive was 2 hours, and they had discovered that they were both people who found the rhythm of a long weekend together, and the particular independence of a week apart to be something that suited them. Neither of them needed to be everything to the other. Both of them chose to be there anyway. There was a room in the farmhouse that Juliana had claimed for reading, a corner with 2 east-facing windows, a chair she'd brought from her apartment, and inevitably, books she left on the shelves and never took back. The room was quietly filling up. Neither of them mentioned it. Both of them noticed. On the first truly warm evening of May, Valentina sat on the terrace with a glass of the first wine she'd pressed from Meridion's vines, rough and young and promising, and watched the hills turn gold in the evening light. Juliana came and sat beside her and took the glass from her hand to taste it. "Well?" Valentina asked. Juliana took a moment, as she always did. Then she said, "It needs time. Everything worth anything does." "Yes." She handed the glass back. "But I can already tell it's going to be extraordinary." She wasn't only talking about the wine, and they both knew it. Valentina Conti, 47 years old, had signed divorce papers in a beige office on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and she had walked out into light that was too bright and sat in her car with her hands in her lap and tried to figure out which version of herself she was supposed to be now. She could not have told you then that 6 months later, she would be sitting on a terrace above the Tuscan valley with a glass of her own wine, and a woman who understood exactly what the word Meridion meant without having it explained. She could not have told you that the stone in her chest would become, eventually, not heavier, but lighter, not a stone at all anymore, but the memory of one, the knowledge that she had carried it and set it down on her own terms. She could not have told you any of that. But she would tell you this. The farm she built in Georgia was real. The love she gave was real. The years spent in quiet, honest work were real. None of that was wasted. All of it was the journey, and the journey brought her here, to the hills above the valley, to a woman with ink on her fingers, and a word for the place you finally arrive. To a table for 12 that was not yet full, but had every intention of being so. To a life that was, at last, entirely and unapologetically her own. She lifted her glass. She thought, I am. And that is where I'll leave Valentina tonight. Not because her story is finished, because it isn't, and the best ones never really are, but because I think you've been with her long enough to carry her with you now. Long enough to feel what she felt, and to remember, if you need to, that starting over is not a defeat. It is, sometimes, the bravest and most loving thing you can do for yourself. Maybe you're in the middle of your own version of this. Maybe you're in the lawyer's office. Maybe you're on the plane, not sure what you're flying toward. Maybe you're standing at the edge of something. A new city, a new relationship, a new understanding of who you are, and wondering if it's too late. It isn't. It is never too late. Valentina was 47. She was just getting started. And if this story gave you something tonight, even something small, even just the feeling that someone understood, I want you to know that that means everything to me. That's why I do this. Not for numbers or algorithms, but for the possibility that somewhere, someone needed to hear that love at 40, at 50, at 62 is not a consolation prize. It is the real thing, the full thing, the thing you deserve. Share this story with someone who needs it. Leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely want to know, and if you're not subscribed yet, please do. Because there are more stories coming. Stories about women who choose themselves. Stories about second chances and late bloom and the particular courage it takes to start again. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next one. She named it Meridion, the place you finally arrive when you've been traveling for a very long time.